Good morning, everybody. It's Kentario. I'm back again with Christ and comic books. So today we are continuing with the Death Note series. We are on part 2, which is the other half of the volume 3. So what's so important about this volume is we left off last time with Light and Ryuzaki, otherwise known as L, having a little tennis match. So with the ending of this tennis match, it ends with Light actually winning. Now what that clues in for L could be neither here nor there. It's just an opportunity for L to be able to observe him a bit more closely so he can see that competitive nature of Light, which does in fact coincide with Kira. He already knows Kira is a competitive person, not competitive as whether or not it doesn't matter if he wins or loses, but competitive in the sight that he will do everything he has to do to win. So that's the thing that's kind of cluing him in more so to saying, well, this does not take you out from being considered Kira. So it goes from them having this playful match to them shifting to them sitting down at a cafe, a little dinner table to eat, but they get a bit more serious. So like I said, L has his suspicions about Light, and Light, of course, is wondering if L is actually who he says he is. Is he actually the L that is searching for me in this case? So with them actually sitting down, it takes things into a more serious perspective because now they start to talk about the evidence that they have for Kira. The things that Kira has done, the things that Kira has brought forth, the messages, particularly that Kira has been sending to L that L has been able to identify. So as they're sitting down and analyzing these documents, of course, you see the mental battle again. Like I mentioned in the tennis match, they're of course going back and forth, but you hear their thoughts. You're seeing, why is he doing this? Should I win or should I lose? So now we're in this situation where we're looking over evidence, and how am I going to communicate this to L? One, to deter him from suspecting me as Kira. Two, to make sure that I'm not giving anything away to make me seem like I actually am Kira when he is, right? So that's a very hard thing to do. When you sit down as a person reading this book, you're like thinking, would I actually be thinking this hard about making sure I don't reveal my identity? I'd probably be sweating. I'd probably have a tail that would give me away. Keep in mind, L is an extremely skilled detective, so if you're thinking detective, detectives know cues to determine if someone's lying or telling the truth. Detectives know what the reactions, the emotional expressions that they're looking for. But the other side to that is Light is brought up by a detective and has been watching his father, so he's aware of all these things already, so he knows how to play his cards. At least for the most part, he knows how to play his cards. So what happens is the 3 messages, which were written by some criminals that have committed suicide, they wrote their suicide notes, and what L brings out is each note. And as L is bringing out each note, Light is identifying, of course, the message that he sent to L. So he, of course, goes to put together the actual message, which is basically stating, hey, L, did you know that gods like apples? So he's bringing this message about. I am paraphrasing. I do apologize. I don't know it verbatim, but that's the message that he gives to him. And he conveys that he sees it as the message, because if it were to be rearranged any other way, it wouldn't make any sense. So the only way to arrange them to where it wouldn't make sense and to be a message would be in that order. And he also had to make it seem as though he had to contemplate it based off of how they were handed to him as well. So he took that into consideration. But here's where L gets a bit tricky. Because he identified that message, L actually brings in a 4th message, which was not a message written out, to throw Light off. Again, this is a moment for L to observe his reaction, because if he was actually Kira, what would his reaction be, being that there's a fake note being brought in? That would be the big question. So now Light is having to act as though, oh, there's a 4th, there's 4th evidence. Okay, let's see what we figure out from there, rather than expressing, there's no 4th message, you're lying. So that's where everything gets a bit, iffy. So, of course, they're trying to identify in this midst of this conversation of determining how much more is Light Kira or how much less is Light Kira. In the midst of this conversation, it leads to them getting a very serious message. L gets the message first, and then Light gets the message, but it seems as though his father has went into the hospital due to a heart attack. So, of course, there's a little bit of panic here, because heart attack equates to Kira trying to kill somebody off. So now they're wondering, oh my gosh, Kira's coming for all the people in the NPA that could be looking into him. So he's in the hospital bed, but thankfully he's not dead. So, of course, that shifts the momentum, because Kira never demonstrates by using the Death Note, I can make it seem like you die without actually killing you. Granted, if he had the idea, he probably actually could. As long as he kills him off later, he could actually do something like that with a death note. So that's something to think about too. You know, to what extent could you even play around the edge of death if you had the death note? Just a funny thought. But as we press forward, now the conversation goes from, you know, just being them two to now Light can, you know, demonstrate this performance of compassion and love for his father versus sitting here contending with L about, you know, if he's Kira or not. He's hoping this will kind of help build that percentage, reduce the percentage of him being actually Kira. So he's playing the role of the concerned son. We shouldn't be doing this. You need to stop putting all of this pressure on my father. You need to stop, you know, because looking at me with my dad, knowing that you're looking at me is what's leading to this heart attack. So he's playing on that very heavily. And with him playing on that, you know, it has the father expressing to him that I've permitted this, that I'm going to be okay with this. It has become a lot for me to deal with, but I will overcome it because I promised that I was going to catch Kira. So that's what's so important about this conversation. And the father is not playing both sides, but the father is demonstrating that mediator between these two opposing, you know, factors. We got L, who's, you know, very inquisitive, suspicious, and is going to do everything he's got to do to catch a criminal in the correct, justified fashion, at least in a legal sense, while you have Light, Kira, pretending to be an upset son who's also willing to do anything, even if it means risking his own life. So, you know, you have that to where the father's having to intervene, you know, the world versus my son, which is kind of what's actually taking place here, is really, literally the world versus your son. So this is a crazy perspective to look at here. And the reason I say that is when you really think about what Light's actually doing, it's like, well, the role, if you only knew. Like, that's the thing about it, is if dad, you only knew. I take a moment to really think about the father, and what the father may actually be thinking is, you know, if it's the case. Because as a truly well-trained detective, he can't discount his son. He has to look at all the evidence too. And that does play a heavy toll on the heart of the father, being that I have to see my son as what my son could actually be, which every person would really need to be mindful of. Whatever my son ends up being, this is going to be the truth of it. I can't justify anything that my son does just because. I know what the truth is, and I have to abide by that truth. You know, that really speaks to a lot of what happens today. A lot of the decisions that parents are making to allow for what their children do is really going to be impacted by whether or not the father is going to show that support regardless of, or are they going to continue to abide by and teach truth to their children so that their children aren't ending up going down a worse road, which in the long run will be destructive for them, versus in the short term, which will be to their benefit. So it really speaks to sacrifice, which is a video that I would actually like to do, as a video on sacrifice. I learned a lot about sacrifice, more so not only from my own personal biblical studies, but what I've listened to in the psychological sense of how it's huge impact. And I'd like to double back to that at another time. But continuing with this, so this kind of ends here to where they're kind of at a standstill. They're kind of at a peaceful place. It has not reduced L's suspicions. The Light is, you know, hoping this will give him a breather from L, and at the same time, the father is looking to, you know, restore himself and get back to the field. But he was able to, at least for Light, identify for him that L is actually who he says he is. So now Light has that confirmation from the father that L is the true L. So now I have to can really operate at the level I would, knowing that he's actually L and not a fake. So that's some important information to take into consideration. So again, the energy vamps up in this story, and as I was reading through this next portion, I was actually listening to some very hype music, some hype anime music, motivational, inspirational music, and as I was listening to it, this is where everything started to turn up. So things get quiet on the side of Light. On the side of Light, you don't see him in this moment. What you end up seeing, however, is some tapes being sent to Sakura TV, which is one of those publicity televisions. You know, they post about conspiracies. They like to spark up trouble, and they're primarily the ones that have been hyping Kira to the public to really get things riled up, which is what they do as that type of channel, that type of reporting channel. So they got these tapes. They're being threatened, either you play these tapes or Kira, will kill you and your people and your chief executives and all of those things. But the manager over the department is just like, dude, I'm so happy they haven't even received these. So he's actually amped up to hype this up, because now that he's received these tapes from Kira, he's willing to play them. So he goes through and he plays these tapes, and it comes to find out that you have the word of Kira, you have an old recording type recorder being used to record the message that Kira is sending through, which is some of the things as this gets posted on television that Elle is seeing, and he's freaking out, that the other detectives start to see and they're freaking out. And even Light's father ends up seeing these, Mr. Yagami, and so now he's in a panic, like, oh my goodness, what's about to happen? So what's happening in these recordings is you have quote-unquote Kira proposing that, these people, evil basically needs to be dealt with, and I'm doing the right thing, and I need the support of the police to be able to do this. I'm not trying to come against you. I'm trying to work with you to bring the world to a place of peace. That's the purpose of Kira. You need to understand the purpose of Kira. So in the midst of him making this big old speech about Kira actually doing this for the good of mankind, for justice, Kira is also pointing out the other people that they're killing. He starts to kill off, TV anchors who have said evil things about Kira. Start to kill off, other people on TV shows that have spoke evil of Kira, which for Elle is like, why is he going this route? Why is he going to this level? And to put it simply, he starts to wonder, is this person doing this right here actually Kira? Which makes things even worse, because now we have to think, if this isn't Kira, then there's a second Kira. And if this also isn't Kira and they're doing things Kira wouldn't do, is Kira in support or against this Kira? So these are all the things that are going through the mind of Elle in the moment as these people on TV are being killed off, as these reporters are posting these things to the public, so the world is seeing all of this be played. And so now the detectives have to wonder, what are we going to do now? They're publicizing all of this mess. And so what happens is one of the detectives goes to leave to go get the tapes and stop the what's being played on television by these reporters at Sakura TV. So he leaves and he goes to the front door. And in the midst of him going to the front door, what happens is one of them dies. So things get even more tense. Oh no, Elle doesn't have to know your name. Elle can just kill you from seeing you on TV. So now we have to contemplate this. Is it a name and face, or is it just face? So what they suspect is that Kira is actually in the vicinity, and maybe our fake IDs don't mean anything. What are we going to be able to do? So they have no idea how they can move to get into Sakura TV, to get them to shut things off. So what ends up happening is Light's father actually takes one of the police trucks and goes boom, busting through the building to get into where they are. And as he gets through, he threatens them to get the tapes. He even pulls his gun out on one of them to threaten them to get the tapes. But the thing he identifies in the midst of this is that it isn't simply that you were threatened by Kira that you did this. This is something that is a part of who you people are, that you are willing to promote something like this to the extent that you have promoted it, that you are willing to stir things up to the extent that you're willing to stir things up. And just to sidebar here, as we draw this to a close, as we come to a close here, to sidebar this, these reporters, these people that are emphasizing all of this chaos, these type of people are not necessarily what I would consider from a biblical sense to be the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but the people that the Pharisees and Sadducees have had an influence on. Somewhat, you could say, the people that would come to heckle Jesus on the side. For instance, the guy that asked Jesus, should we pay taxes to Caesar? Or even more so, you could say they're more of a Judas type person. They act as though they're on the side of good, but they're really not. They're not doing this to get the truth out there. They're doing this to promote themselves. So that's one of the things to really identify with the reporters that are here. It's just a little side note, just a little thing I thought about as I was talking about this. So now Pops got the recordings. Pops even made sure he got any of the copies of the recordings. So what are we going to do now? How is he going to get out? He's able to get in contact with Elle. In the midst of him getting in contact with Elle, Elle's on the phone with the chief of police. And as they're talking, they set up a plan to get him out. And what you see in this moment, I thought it tore me up because, again, I was listening to that popping music. So what I see is as the father's coming out, he's surrounded by police trucks. He's got the police with their shields up, blocking the door. So if Kira's in the vicinity, he can't even see him. They get him in a car. He leaves by himself to go to where Elle is so that they could review the tapes. So this was so significant, and the only reason I say that as we draw this to a close is it's so significant because you see that the police are still going to stand on the side of justice. They're standing on the right side of justice. We have to do the right thing. We have to do what's right for truth. This isn't them necessarily showing support for Elle, but they're showing support for doing the right thing. So that's something that's truly different. And I guess the way you could play that out when you're looking at L being a Christ-like figure and who the police are is almost like the relationship between Christ and the Roman soldiers. So if you ever seen Christ speak with Roman soldiers, the Roman soldiers respect Christ, Jesus. As Jesus was living his life, they were people of authority, but they also respected Jesus' authority. They didn't disrespect Jesus. They came to Jesus when they actually needed something, and they were able to trust in what Jesus was willing to do. And in this moment, that demonstrated a trust in what L is capable of doing as a detective, even though they are the police force, even though they're the ones in authority when it comes to distributing out justice and being able to trust in them to do the right thing. You know, that's what was very significant here. I know a lot of people are mad with the police today, and they have their own opinions about the police. On a separate video, I'll talk about that, but I think this is something significant to demonstrate that no matter what, you have to be willing to do what's right. You don't have to be able to sway to the left or to the right to satisfy someone else's feelings. You got to be able to stay strong and do the right thing no matter what it may cost, because in the end, that'll be what brings about the victory. And that's what's most important. So as we draw this video to a close, I want to go ahead and point out that the one doing all of this was in fact not Light, if you couldn't already tell. The one that was doing this was a young blonde-headed girl that moved to Japan to try and meet Kira. She's a fangirl of Kira. So we have someone that's in support of Kira. But so if we have Kira, who, as I pointed out in my last video, represents people's image of what Christ should have been or what God should be, then who is this girl in line with the rest of the story? I'd love to hear you guys' opinions on what you think this young girl means. As we get ready for Volume 4, we're going to be hitting on Part 1 here soon. Hopefully I can bring that out by Sunday. Thank you guys, and y'all have a blessed day.